Everyone, Business Guru here with part 3 of my cash flow video series. So this is really a roundup to clarify a couple of things in my last video and to deal with the psychological issues here and explain why I got myself into a poor cash flow position to begin with. So one thing I forgot to clarify in the last video was why you can't sell yourself out of a poor cash flow position, or why you can't sell yourself out of a poor cash flow system, I should say. And the reason is because in order to get out of a poor cash flow system, you have to sell vastly more or earn vastly more revenue than you're currently producing, because you have to be able to generate enough extra cash flow to get ahead of all your debts and other obligations. And usually if you're struggling, that means you need a significant increase in the cash flow. The problem is if you have debt that has payments that are structured based on the performance of your business. So if you get into a fintech working capital loan type arrangement like I had with Shopify, it's virtually impossible to do so. If you have, and I'll explain in a minute why that is. If you have other fixed debts where your interest rates are fixed or your payments are fixed, it's much more possible to do it. But what it hinges on really is whether or not you have the existing capacity to be able to generate those additional cash flows with minimal with minimal additional expense. And this is usually where you hit a problem. If you're operating more or less at full capacity or close to full capacity, you're going to run into a situation where you don't have enough resources to be able to generate the additional revenue you're going to need without an additional investment. And that investment is going to require capital. And if you are maxed out in terms of your credit lines and your borrowing capacity, then you don't have the money to be able to actually make that investment to get to the level of capacity you would need to be able to get out ahead of your cash flow requirements. In fact, what happens is your cash flow requirement goes up because you need to incur more, you need to buy more supplies, more inventory, you may need more staff to process the sales that you currently have. And so, it doesn't really help you. Selling more doesn't really necessarily help you get out from under that. Now, in Shopify's case, and in a fintech type arrangement, the problem with that is where Shopify is taking 25% of my sales, that's a significant portion of my margin. Most businesses don't make a gross margin of more than 50%. So if a lender is taking 25 right off the top, that leaves them only 25% to be able to cover the remaining expenses, and that's usually not sufficient. And so if you sell more, assuming you have the capacity to make the sales, the additional sales without a significant amount of additional expense, the more you sell, the more you have to pay back to Shopify. And so the only way selling more would allow you to get out from under is if those additional sales can be made without incurring any additional costs. The problem, of course, is that that's very, very difficult, if not impossible to do. In the context of my business, that will only happen if I'm selling inventory that I have completely paid for already, and I'm able to process enough of it using Will and Josh to generate enough cash flow to get out from under. The problem that I've had is that most of the inventory that I have that you see behind me here and in this office that's paid for is lower value stock. It's stamps that catalog anywhere between 10 cents and $20 or $5 or $10. It all has a value, but most most collectors are only going to pay between 40 and 60% of catalog price for most of these items when they actually want them. And so, if you're trying to put together an auction lot that catalogs $30 from the material I have in this room, it takes many minutes to come up with one lot. And even then, the bids that I'm going to get for those lots are only going to be $2 to $3 or $4 bids per lot. And so, I'm not really going to make enough extra gross dollars to be able to get out from under all of the fixed obligations I have each month. I would need another team of 2 people, another Will and Josh, to be able to produce the amount of lots that I would need to be able to achieve that figure with the inventory that I have that's paid for. But of course, getting that team together, that's a whole nother set of wages and source deductions. So, it's not going to solve the problem at all. The only use that I have for the inventory that's in this office that you could see is to sprinkle it into auctions over time. I mean, it's highly profitable stuff. It is paid for, but I can only process maybe 20 or 30 lots or 40 lots a week made up with this kind of inventory. And so I sprinkle it in, I draw it down over a long period of time, and I supplement it with more expensive material that I buy, that I can lot quickly. That's really the only use for it. So that's the reason why you typically can't sell your way out of a poor cash flow system because you just won't. You'll hit your capacity constraints long before you're able to generate the additional revenue that you would need. And that's why you shouldn't feel bad about it. So that gets us to the next topic here, which is how did I get into this position and why should you be listening to me if I had such a poor cash flow system? And why, I mean, it's a legitimate question, right? I mean, if I knew what I was doing, why wouldn't I have had a perfect cash flow system right out of the gate? Well, the reason is because I didn't have enough capital when I started the business. And I didn't know that. Unfortunately, there's no rule book out there that I know of that you can buy that, if you decide you want to start a restaurant, is going to tell you, yeah, you need $2 million minimum to start and run and build a restaurant. There are no books out there that tell a stamp dealer how much capital he has to have in order to build his customer base to the point where the business could sustain itself. It's all trial and error. So when I started this business, I tried to raise $150,000. That's what my original business plan called for. And I had secured 3 commitments from 3 investors. One was my original employer from Vancouver that I did my articling with. One was my existing partner at the firm I was working with at the time. And one was a former client of mine from a firm I had worked at before the one I was at before I quit. And actually there were 4 investors. There was a 4th investor, which was another client from the firm I was at. Now, with those, and I knew all of these people very, very well. I had very good relationship with them. I had every reason to believe that the investments and the commitments would be fulfilled and I would have all the money I would need. Well, come to find out, so I quit my job. I gave my notice. Um, the partner that worked in the firm I was with came through and gave me what he promised. The original employer in Vancouver did the same thing. The client that I had at my existing firm did the same thing. But the fourth guy, the guy from the second prior firm, he backed out, and he was in it for $50,000. So, here I was with no job now. Um, I had the money from the other three investors, so I now had a commitment to all three of them to protect their investment and to execute the plan that I had communicated to them. And so, from my point of view, I had to proceed. Now, I suppose I could have just canceled everything at that point, given them their money back, and said, "Look, I didn't get all the money I needed for the plan," um, and then tried to get my job back, or simply go and join another firm. That was a possibility, but I really didn't want to do that, and I honestly felt like I could make a go of it. So by changing my plan. So what I did was I went, I got together with my partner Steph, and we looked at our situation in Toronto, and we determined that um, we weren't going to be able to stay in Toronto because the expenses of living there would eat up most of the savings I had put into the business and a lot of the capital I'd raised. And we decided to move out to New Brunswick, where we are now. Um, And by making that change and reducing the overhead cost associated with living and running the business, I felt fairly confident I could stretch the capital out further than I had originally planned. And I did manage to do that. But I ran into a whole other issue that I had completely not seen coming and that nobody warned me about. And that was the problem with eBay. Now, I will do a separate series of videos on double-sided platforms and double-sided markets like eBay and Uber and Airbnb and Etsy and things of that nature, because that's a whole other set of topics. But suffice it to say that I got into a situation with eBay where I couldn't increase my sales. No matter what I did, I couldn't get to financial viability with eBay, even when I had been with them for 5 years. And I got into a position where um, I couldn't leave them because I would lose all of my income. So I eventually did leave because I saw no future there. And I did get some accounting contracts like I talked about in a couple of videos ago. And I did start my new website on Brixton Chrome on Shopify. But the problem that I had was that it took a long time for me to reach financial viability on Shopify. And in the interim, I had to borrow all kinds of debt in order to supplement the difference between what Shopify was earning me and what my lifestyle costs. Now, my lifestyle is very, very basic. It's very plain. Steph and I don't do much except work. But, even still, it was 5 or 6 years of basic lifestyle that I had to fund, and I wasn't making enough money to do that. So, I had to max out my lines of credit, all my credit cards, and all that money effectively became part of the business. And then eventually, when I ran out of personal credit, I had to take a working capital loan from Shopify. And from there on, from that point on, I had no access to any other money. Now, thanks to the fact that my business has been profitable and that my business concept was a solid one, I have been able to build my sales up to the point where I was making $5,000 or $6,000 of cash flow after expenses every month, and I was able to carry all of those debts with great difficulty, but I was able to do it. If I had not had a solid business concept, if I did not have a good value proposition, I would never have made the kind of profit and the kind of money that would allow me to carry that. And what would happen is I would simply have gone insolvent, and I wouldn't have been able to pay one or more of the cards or the lines, and I would have had to wind the business down. And that's really how a lot of businesses fail. It's as simple as that. It's nothing to feel bad about. It wasn't avoidable here. I didn't have enough money, and I had to get it. And when you're starting a business, banks are very, very reluctant to loan money. They typically won't even touch you until you've been in business for 5 years. So for those first 5 years between 2015 and 2020, the banks were just a no-go. Once I had passed the 5-year mark, well, then the problem became how much debt I had. And with the amount of debt I was carrying, nobody was going to look at me. And the only way to get out of that debt, the only way to change that situation was with a massive infusion of capital. And the only solution open to me was a mortgage on the house. And the only reason that I was able to pull this off, the only reason this was even an option for me, is because I was able to show enough profitability from the business to show the mortgage broker that I was more than capable of handling the new payments. If he just went off of my tax returns, it wouldn't have worked because I haven't actually taken enough income on paper out of the company to afford a mortgage like that. So, all of it hinged on my ability to show enough profitability in the ongoing operation such that I could get an approval. And what it is going to mean going forward is that I am going to have significant personal and corporate tax bills to pay going forward. Up until this point, I've been able to file fairly minimal returns because I haven't had a lot of income either way. But that's all going to change this year, and I am going to have to plan for that. So I'm not really totally out of the woods in terms of difficulty level. This is still going to be a challenging time. But what's happened is it's gone from being very stressful and ultimately untenable in the long term to being manageable and exciting, really, in the sense that I'll be able to actually see some growth and I'll actually feel successful in a way that I haven't up to this point. And I'm really looking forward to that. And you should too if you're in a similar position. But don't... the real key takeaway from this is that a bad cash flow system is not by itself an indication that you're a bad business person or that you don't know how to run a business. Sometimes when you're starting out, that's just the way it is. It's going to be dictated by what people are willing to offer you and what they're willing to lend you. And if, the terms aren't very good or you're having to rely on loans from multiple sources with payment dates that cluster around different times of the month, then you've automatically got a bad cash flow system, and it's going to be a struggle for you to operate. And that's just the way it is. And until you can lift yourself out of that with another source of capital. So that's it. That tells the whole story about cash flow and why I got into the position I was in. And so I hope this has been helpful in explaining this concept to all of you. And I appreciate your watching. And hang in there, okay? Bye for now.